here. It's a non-voting position, but we very much welcome the business community's contribution to our debate, and it's entirely appropriate, I think, that Claire joins us, who served on the Assembly and knows what's been happening, and I would like to propose that she join. I don't know if we are proposing or we endorse or we ratify Claire's membership. Ian, would you be happy with that?
Entirely happy, Mr. Chairman.
Lewis?
Happy to.
So we ratify Claire and we welcome you. Thank you very much indeed. Claire, do you want to comment about the Assembly?
We have reviewed what is happening in the Assembly, given my standing into this position, assuming it did take place, and I'm looking at a replacement. I also need to tell you that Sir Michael Marshall has decided that this is the right time to step away from his responsibility there, and I would like to nominate a replacement for Sir Michael, who is Christopher Walkinshaw.
Thank you. And under our standing orders, the nomination by the LEP, or effectively Claire as the de facto representative of the LEP, is a nomination which we as the board can decide whether we endorse or not. So Claire has nominated Christopher Walkinshaw. I will mention that Christopher Walkinshaw is a personal friend of mine. He is a member of Cambridge Ahead, which I think is a very useful contribution to the area, and he works at Marshall's. With that, I would be very happy to endorse his appointment to the Assembly, and I'll ask Lewis and Ian.
I'm also happy to endorse that recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
Also happy.
Great. So that does, just for the avoidance of doubt, that is Christopher Walkinshaw replacing Michael Marshall, but Claire, you still need to find somebody to replace yourself.
Just make one further comment, just for the record. I did not know that Christopher was a good personal friend of yours.
So we're now on agenda item 3, declarations of interest. I think they're all on our forms. Claire, you may need to do a new form, I suppose. Oh, you've done one, so that's perfect. Are there any other declarations of interest?
No.
No? We go to the minutes of the previous meeting, which start at page 1 and go through to page 18. Shall I go around the table? Lewis, do you have any comments on those? Would you have any comment, Claire?
Section 10, date of next meeting, it just says the LEP board meeting on 19th of December, his replacement. I just thought there might be a few verbs or something in there that you might want to put in.
You're absolutely right. We're on page 10, aren't we? Paragraph 10. The LEP board meeting on 19th December. Should we put will consider or something like that?
Yep.
And then with that change, would everybody be happy if I sign the minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you. Questions from members of the public. We have got 3 questions from members of the public, and 1 and possibly 2 councillors want to exercise their right to speak. The 3 questioners are Roger Tomlinson. Roger, I'll take your question with agenda item 7, rapid mass transport. Maureen Mace, I'll take your question, agenda item 9, A10 Ely to Cambridge study. And James Littlewood, I'll take your question with agenda item 10. Councillor Simon Edwards, I don't think he's here, but has said that he would like to ask a question on agenda item 11, rural travel hubs. And Councillor Bick, you want to ask a question or say something at some stage? Will you let me know when? Item 4.
People are saying they can't hear you that well, so you
No,
might need to just bring
we've
it
passed
closer.
that one.
Item 4.
No.
7.
Item 7. Thank you. So we will now go to agenda item 6, which is an overview from the chairman of the Joint Assembly, Councillor Price, and you've kindly got a written report that starts on page 19 of our agenda pack, but the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As per the previous Executive Board, I'm not going to go through that Chair's report in detail because you will all have seen it and all have read it. But I will give you an overview and then can clarify any points that the relevant agenda item. There was a good debate amongst the Joint Assembly members in relation to the presentation and reports that were presented, and this is reflected in the variety of opinions that you'll see in this report. The Rural Travel Hubs report was the one which divided opinion the most, with strong opinions expressed both for and against the approaches being recommended to the Executive Board. The Joint Assembly members were very pleased to hear more about the findings of our big conversation and welcomed the opportunity to make decisions in the future based on solid evidence. The Joint Assembly agreed with the recommended approach to the Cambridge to Ely A10 study to commend the study to the Combined Authority, but did not want to lose the opportunity to influence modal shift, as this is a key part of the Greater Cambridge's Partnerships work. And I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Does anyone have any questions? Shall I start? Lewis, have you got any questions on the report? Ian?
No question, just a comment. I attended with Councillor Price, as he knows. It was, as he describes, I think, a interesting debate on various items, and obviously there was quite a lot of agreement in lots of the items and some disagreements on just, I think, just one, as was said, or some differences. Apart from that, I have nothing else to add, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Claire?
No further comment. I was at the meeting and took part in it, so I will try not to double count.
Great, thank you. I mean, what I picked up really is everyone seems enthusiastic about the concept of the metro, which is really, really good. The rural travel hubs, I think, is interesting. We're going to come on to that in a moment. I mean, that's why we tried to do it, A, as a pilot concept, and B, desperately tried to do it as a bottom-up from the locality concept rather than a top-down imposition. And I think it is interesting that, I mean, personally, I think broadly speaking that they are a good idea, but the mix of views shows, I think, that our approach is the right way, is what I would comment there, of doing it as a bottom-up approach and doing it on a pilot basis first. And also, I think where we've got to is a very much not having a one-size-fits-all concept, and that each one must be looked at in its individual locality as what suits each individual one. There's no way they are one-size-fits-all. And I think that's sort of borne out by the comments. So if members are happy, we'll move on now to agenda item 7, which starts on page 23, which is the rapid mass transport options appraisal. And Mr. Tunstall, you're going to introduce that. Well, I've got a question, I'm sorry. Roger, I'll take you first, and then Tim, you want to speak on it.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose it's worth noting in this week of celebrating women's suffrage and all the great concerns on equality that here we are with 3 white, mature males as the voting councillors determining the future of the environment and transport in Cambridgeshire. Thank you. The Mayor of the Combined Authority has confirmed to the Cambridge News that his office leaked the Steer-Davis-Gleave report, and that one of the reasons he wanted to do that was partly to disrupt the consultation process on Camborne to Cambridge better bus journeys. And I can confirm that from our conversations in our village that some residents did find the change in the proposals very confusing. It appears to us that no route has yet been decided upon by the Executive Board formally, though increasingly, as the officers have repeatedly said to us, in many ways that decision is predetermined. And now, departing Chris Tunstall in his report, points out that the Cambridge area metro scheme is predicated on an off-road guided busway, and indeed the comparison of costs for metro options assumes that the preferred bus option busway will be built and paid for outside the preferred bus scheme. We're kind of getting used to this manipulation of how cost comparisons are made, but it's still unfair. However, The key question, he reports that legal discussions are underway on how to progress this with the potential to assist delivery. I've referred to the paragraphs 318, 319 in Chris's report. So my question is very simple. What exactly are the transport officers trying to achieve by these legal discussions? And how does this impact on the Executive Board's decision-taking timetable and the process for the Cambourne to Cambridge Better Bus Journeys Phase 1? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to attempt to answer the question, but Chris will probably then come in and answer it better. What exactly are transport officers trying to achieve with the legal discussions? My understanding, and Chris will come in, is that there are a number of legal and statutory routes that are used in this country to do schemes. An off-road scheme might or might not come under something called a Transport and Works Act order, which is an application to the Secretary of State for Transport. Something done on the road might be done through local highway powers, which is a different part of legislation or different part of the way the law works. I suppose it's, broadly speaking, equivalent of a planning permission, but planning permission for not for houses, but for transport schemes. And my understanding is that what exactly the transport officers are trying to achieve is understand which bits of legislation and which bits of legal route and application process they should go. Second part of your question is, how does this impact our decision-taking timetable? The answer is not at all. Chris, do you want to, have I given roughly the right answer? Do you want to amplify that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll just build on the first part, the legal bit. CAM is new. It isn't running in this country, albeit that Birmingham, the West Midlands, are looking at something similar called Sprint. We have two things that we've got to sort out. As the Chairman has said, the order to actually get the road, if it's an off-road, or indeed if it's an on-road, what we need to do with that, with it being a new development. The other thing that has got to be borne in mind, there is what is termed construction and use. So vehicles that go on roads have to comply with construction and use. And whilst the consultant has said that segregated because of reliability would be a preferred option, they've obviously also indicated that it can run on the road. So what we're trying to make sure is that whatever comes out of the future development of CAM, that it is a legal vehicle that can run on roads, and that we can actually get the correct orders to give us the powers to build whatever we need to build. And that's purely the discussions that are going on, because it is new. It isn't running in the country. We all have to operate under the powers and the laws that we have in the country, and those are the discussions that are ongoing at the moment. So I hope that amplifies a bit more on the question that's been raised. Could I just, seeing I'm dealing with the question, if I deal with all of the question at this moment, before I start on the report, I think it is also right to say that from the point of view, Roger mentioned about predetermined. Of course, nothing is predetermined. We are out to consultation. There are 3 routes being considered, one of which has a number of alternatives, the off-road route. It is the board that will make the decision based on more information, based on the results of the consultation. That decision will be made in July as to how we go forward. And then even at that point, as we develop the scheme further, whatever comes out of that scheme, whether it be on-road or off-road, there will be further statutory consultation, and I have no doubt whatsoever, public inquiries and so on. So there is no way, my feeling at the moment, anybody can say anything is predetermined, because some of this will be outside of the board's control anyway, once the board makes a decision which option to pursue, and that will be in July. So if perhaps I can...
No, we're going to take...
No. So Chris, I'm going to stop you a moment. Tim.
Okay, don't worry, it's not a complicated, obscure technical question I'm going to ask you, so because you haven't had sight of this. I wanted to ask you about the situation of CAM in respect of the combined authority. In view of the combined authority's adoption of the lead role in developing the CAM scheme, how in practice does the board propose to ensure an integrated approach to the development of this together with other schemes, all of which I think we're going to need to make the step change in the local transport picture within Greater Cambridge. So I'm asking this question from the perspective that I think it's right that the CAM concept is taken further. So I'm broadly happy with that decision. But the CAM must not, in my opinion, be allowed to become the only show in town. And it's unlikely, I think, to provide for all the transport needs in the area. I think many people concede that. In particular, for example, for journeys originating within a lot of the urban area, and for some people in the rural area. And yet by splitting up demand, it could have an adverse effect of some of on some, or of even the sparse bus services that we've got today. I think it's vital that local transport strategy doesn't get utterly dominated by the CAM scheme, and that the game doesn't now change to just a hell for leather dash for this piece of infrastructure to a degree that everything else is left unaddressed or not fitting properly in its wake. For example, as I think all discussed in other places, Greater Cambridge needs a fully transformed public transport, not only CAM, which may be a good answer, but only to part of the question. It also needs a complementary upgraded intensive bus service, and it also needs a demand management scheme on its roads, which can offer funding for a lot of that, encouragement for modal shift, which is sustainable, and a street environment conducive to the continued safe growth of cycling and walking. And I'll commend to you the question from PPF that's coming later on all of that. But the mission of the GCP was never to be just an infrastructure delivery vehicle, but to bring into being a system with services that work for people, some of which may be about infrastructure, some of which may not be about infrastructure. And my feeling is that the GCP itself has come a long way in realising this, and I know some people, some members of the public, have their grievances, which they hold against the GCP for aspects of the work, and I've not been happy with all aspects of it myself either. But the GCP does provide an important means of knitting together the threads involving local interest groups and opinion formers within the prime geography in Greater Cambridge. And it's now supported, I'm pleased to say, by a dedicated team of professional officers who are looking at their challenges holistically. I think it would be very serious for us in Greater Cambridge if this was now to be blown apart or destabilised. So the question is, what does the board envisage to ensure that all of the parts fit together in the light of the Mayor's role as we go forward, and in particular to work out of the system the current sense of unproductive competition which seems to creep in to the relationship between the Mayor and the GCP?
So thank you, Tim, for that. You had told me that you wanted to speak, but as you said, we didn't know what the question was. I think Lewis might answer your direct question, but firstly, just to say, I agree with an enormous amount of what you said. I think you were very kind and some nice things that you said. I completely and utterly share your praise for the officer team, which I think you've got a fantastic team. That's one of the great strengths of the GCP at the moment. So grateful to that, and I agree that whilst I am a massive fan of the CAM Metro, I totally agree it shouldn't be the only show in town. We've got an amazing programme of things that we're looking at. With that introduction to your particular question, Lewis, you might want to answer that, and Ian as well.
Well, I think I'd start by the same point, one of the same points, which is that along with the wider community in Greater Cambridge, it's pretty critical that we all work together on this. And like Francis, I agree with almost everything you said, which is not always the case, but it's a good place to be. So I think just without speaking for ages to make about 8 or so points, I think first of all, we do need something transformational in the city centre if we can achieve it. But as you say, we need to have a duality from the Greater Cambridge Partnership so that what we deliver delivers whether or not that is landed. And the biggest obstacle, I believe, will be funding. Obviously, there are still technical issues about it, but clearly the first guided busway reached the edge of town, and because of various obstacles, including the non-cooperation of Network Rail, was unable to do what really needed to be done, the last mile. So I think that there's a belief and a faith, and we'll come on to the report, there's a lot of good in the analysis by Steer Davis-Gleave, even though some people have poked fun at them that there had been a previous report 15 years ago. But there's a lot of good there, and there was also the work by the GCP in supporting the earlier concept with John Miles. So it wasn't as if this all started last May. There was a view that in tranche 2, when there was a larger fund available, that the GCP would be in a different position to be able to help such a scheme, which just wasn't physically an ambition that was possible to advance at the beginning. So first of all, we've got that focus on the opportunity of a major change, a game changer potentially in the city centre. Second, we don't know about timescales, and clearly in addition to dual view, that we have to come up with solutions that will work whether or not this comes to pass. We also have an interim period of possibly 10 years, and we have homes and jobs to connect. And so we need, in addition to duality, we also need to deliver in that period. So if we look at the timescales that are coming forward for the more significant projects, we are looking at starts in 2020, 2021, and we have to crack on looking at those. So it's not simple to try and plan for two potential combinations of infrastructure, but I believe it is doable. And the route work, the focus on different route options is important. And like others, and in response to Mr. Tomlinson and others, we haven't made up our mind, and it could well be that we come up with a different combination of initial routes than main routes for the ongoing future. But we will obviously look at that. We certainly need to link up rail with whatever comes from CAM, and I'm a believer in the concept, as well as it potentially being deliverable. Interesting things can happen if you use land value capture and infrastructure levy in a different way, as well as look at the private investment and the case that Steer Davis-Gleave make that it's pay for itself in revenue terms. I was very sceptical until I looked at their number crunching as to whether it could actually pay for its revenue. You can't operate something that needs long-term heavy subsidies. So I think we already have, Tim, quite a combination of rail, buses and other options, and clearly it's how that fits in without being disruptive. And it will not provide all of the routes, it will only provide some. So therefore buses and other options are critical, and like you, I agree that we have to come up with a discussion and a conclusion on measures that will reduce the number of vehicles coming into the city and improve the air quality in the city, and look at the urban design of movement and spaces in the city, whilst reflecting on the needs to meet the needs of South Cambridgeshire and wider residents. So I think it's a good thing. We'll come on to it in the actual report. It has to be a partnership. The Greater Cambridge Partnership in particular has done work on what I would describe as Zone 2, the routes from near the edge of the city out into South Cambridgeshire. Those are not being addressed by tunnelling. Those may, if and when CAM is delivered, and I believe it can be, can link to that. So I would see a discussion leading towards an agreement with the Mayor as to what the role of the GCP is and how that works, reflecting the fact that the Mayor does have overall responsibility for transport strategy, and we have to be realists and work with the Mayor. So I would hope and expect that the Mayor would see the virtue of the strengths of the GCP in delivering on its current plans, albeit that those are flexible ones. And as you've said, address issues within Cambridge which need to be addressed by the collective decisions of people in Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire. This is not a solution imposed from outside, and it has to continue to involve the community organisations, local organisations, business and universities. So we will stand up also for protecting the Greater Cambridge role in this and for its funding.
Thank you. Lewis. Ian, anything you want to add? Then I'll ask Claire.
Not a great deal. I think Lewis has covered most of it. In answer, Tim, I think I've described it before and I'll describe it again. It's like a jigsaw. And what we have to make sure is all those parts of the jigsaw are there. And I've written down walking, cycling, city access, residents parking, off-street parking, rail. But we have to work in partnership, and we have to work in partnership with the Combined Authority, with City and South Cambs. We have to work with Cambridgeshire County Council. We have to work with the communities, business, Highways England and the rail industry. If you look about the possibility of having a station in the south of Cambridgeshire, well, obviously that needs to be plumbed in with Network Rail and those discussions. So I think the question really is, how do we work collectively? How do we work together for the benefit of the communities, not just within Cambridge or South Cambs, but actually further afield as well? A lot of people, as we know, come in from Haverhills, which is not even in our county. So we must take those sort of things into account. And the only way you do that is to actually all understand the objectives that we're trying to all achieve. And I think there is that light, and part of it will be the Cam Metro. It is part of the jigsaw. It is not the jigsaw. Thank you.
Claire.
Just 3 quick points to add to those. So one is nearly everyone seems to be totally behind looking at CAM and seeing whether it is viable or not, which is great. Joined up thinking there, I think. 2 is that we at GCP have got great strengths that we should be looking at the behavioural change. So there are a lot of very soft aspects to this that will have a really hard impact to cope in the short term with the growth that we've got here. And 3, the people wanting the common good can work together. So it's just down to making the effort, getting people together and working with each other. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we move on to the report itself. We're on page 23, and Chris, you're going to introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. What you've actually got in front of you is the report from SDG. This report's been commended to you to provide the findings from the SDG study. It is an option appraisal study. I have to say it's a robust analysis of the options in terms of what you would normally look for an options appraisal. The next stage is to go to a strategic outline business case. So I'll just run through and pull out the key facts. It has been suggested that you commend this to the Mayor, but at the same time that from a GCP perspective, all the schemes that we are currently in the process of developing, we develop them with a view to what the outcome of CAM might be. The benefit we've got here is because of the nature of CAM, it can run on road or segregated. Having said that, the consultants have made it clear that segregated would work better, but nonetheless it will run on road or segregated, depending on, of course, making sure we meet all the legal requirements. It was a joint study with the CA, and they considered various modes of mass rapid transit. They looked both nationally and internationally. The sort of areas they looked at was like rail, monorail, bus rapid transit, tram, cable car. They looked at all the options that were being run elsewhere in the world, in addition to what was actually being run at home. And I think it is fair to say, and building on comments that were made earlier, wherever you look at mass rapid transit within this country, and I'd suggest abroad as well, I can't be as categoric as that, but certainly within this country, you have to subsidise it. And we are small. If you go to the northeast, Theirs is subsidised by £25 million a year, and they've got 1 million plus people there. So we are looking at a number of recommendations in terms of what it must provide for Cambridge. So in terms of that, we're looking at growth, we're looking at the accessibility and the economy, we're looking at the current problems that we've got, and as I say, we're looking at the affordability. It's based on the principles, I won't go through them, they're laid out in paragraph 3.3. SDG, having looked at all the options, and again, I won't go through the report, but you'll see there's a very extensive analysis. They've plotted where other systems are in terms of population and size of system, and they've come up with 2 options. They out of everything that's around, they came up with 2 solutions, and that was AVRT, which, as we said, is something that is being pioneered within Cambridge, and light rail. And again, there are proposals for light rail. Both of those have issues. So what the consultants did, which is probably not usual necessarily in an options appraisal, what they did was they came up with a 3rd option that actually took the best bits out of both of those and compared that with those 2 solutions. And again, the hybrid that came out of that CAM, it is a rubber-tired tram. So the benefit it has over the tram, it's not restricted to running on rails. As soon as you run something on rails, it cannot run anywhere else. The benefit on AVRT is it has more stops, it can stop more, and in terms of the tunnelling was reduced on it as well. And it's not at the very leading edge of development because there is nothing like AVRT in the world at all. Having said that, there is nothing like CAM, other than small examples of that in Rouen and places like that. So it is tried and tested, but it is felt by the consultant that this would actually provide the solution to Cambridge's requirements for mass rapid transit. In paragraph 3.9, it looks at the 7 transport requirements and the deliverability risks that each option would have, and it then comes to its conclusion, which is a conclusion that's been recommended to you. I think in terms of CAM itself, CAM can utilise the existing proposals that we've got, whether that be on street or segregated. We just need to do that extra amount of work on it, and then of course we need to confirm how that would operate in practice when we go out and consult. In terms of the city centre itself, there is no solution for the city centre other than going underneath or restricting the traffic out in the suburbs itself. So the proposal there is to tunnel. The reason for the range of costs is because the tunnelling, it is only an options appraisal. The tunnelling lengths will need to be looked at in more detail, but having said that, the consultants feel that it is about a 1.5 million to 1 billion to 1.7 billion proposal. Now, more work needs to be done on that. That will be the strategic outline business case. Then there's got to be an outline business case. Then there's got to be a final business case. So there's a lot of work to do. Finally, perhaps, if I can just make the point, and this was raised earlier with Tim's question, Councillor Bick's question, this is the backbone, if you like, of a system. This is not replacing. This is actually working with the services. We have got to ensure that this doesn't actually mitigate against services and we get the law of unintended consequences occurring. So it is about this being an integral part. It's not a system on its own. It is an integral part of a network of other issues like toxicity charge, like demand management, like electric buses, all that sort of thing would be built into this. Park and rides. It requires park and rides. You require to pull people together into an area that you can move them quickly into where they want to go. So it does require all of that. It is part of that integrated system. No more to say on that, Chair, but happy to take any questions from the board.
Thank you. So should we have questions of clarification, and then later we'll have the board debate? Claire, do you want to start whether you've got any questions of clarification?
None that I haven't had answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian?
I have no points for clarification at this point.
Lewis?
Well, I had one, because I did have a discussion at the Combined Authority on the nature of the brief as published in Appendix 1.2, and I got an assurance from the Chief Executive of the Combined Authority that a much stronger brief was being developed. Do we know that further work has been done on that brief? Because it was something of a holding document that was attached to the Combined Authority report.
It was, and it's included to give you a feel as to what the next stage is. The next stage would include for. The Combined Authority is working on the brief. We haven't seen the brief at this stage. I would hope that we would see it and we would be able to comment on it.
Okay. I mean, I think they're offering to spend their money on it, and in a way, that's their choice. I'm sure we would have been willing to contribute. But I just want to make sure that we're clear what the brief is, because it's pretty critical in terms of the current plans for the GCP.
It is, and we are in close discussion with them. For example, the South East Corridor, the 1307 consultation is ready to go out, and that has been, we have included CAM within that, because as has been said before, there can be confusion out there. There is this concept about CAM, you're promoting this particular scheme. What are you actually promoting here? So we are working very closely with them to ensure that whatever we put out is in line with that.
Okay, thanks.
Peter, you'll perhaps kindly pick up that baton. Thank you. I've only got one question for clarification, and when we're on page 28, Chris, 3.22, in the little table at the bottom, it says construction City Core 2026. I think if we compare that to page 32, that 2026 is hopefully the end of the three-year construction rather than the beginning, just for the avoidance of doubt.
Chair, it is at the top, if you see, it says it is the completion. So that's correct. But maybe if I can also just add on the other dates. The other dates are predicated on the schemes and their progress that we have currently got. If you were to start afresh, those dates would not be hit.
So what I think you're saying is the work that the GCP has done and is doing is important to get this timetable on track. If one started all over again, it would all be delayed.
Correct, Chair.
Thank you. And then I'm just going to sort of note on page 31 in the draft CAM next steps, paragraph 1.1, first bullet point. This is Stuart Davis-Gleave speaking. We believe a strategic outline business case can be developed within a 6-month time scale. So we have a board meeting in September, don't we? I think. And so with any luck, this work being done by the Combined Authority, we would hear about it in time for our September board meeting. Great. If there are no more questions for clarification, do we want to have a discussion and a debate? And I'll take us back to page 23, which are the recommendations in paragraph 2.1. Should we go the same way round? And Claire, do you want to kick off with your thoughts?
You're a brilliant example, somebody. No, I said at the Assembly meeting that I'm very enthusiastic about this as a potential step change in what we can achieve. We recognise that growth is very rapid in Cambridge. We want to spread that around Cambridge, and therefore we need to have good access between the key locations for homes and employment. This is potentially a very, very good solution. We know it's technically viable, that's my belief. Whether it's commercially viable is the key question.
Ian, do you want to?
I think the only points to add, actually, I think are at page 26, if you like, so at the top of the page at 3.9, which I think lays out really what I call the challenge, the benefits, you know, the coverage, the frequency, the journey times, accessibility, number of exchanges, etc., and also highlights on the other side, we might have called the risks of affordability and value for money and the like. My question, actually, I think you've just asked, Mr. Chairman, was bearing in mind the timescale of the 6 months, will we have something coming back to this board in September? But I think that's something that you've just asked, but I think it is actually quite essential that we do have something coming back to this board in September. I'm flexible if that is not completed at that time. We need to plumb that into the combined authorities when the report is available. So I'm not totally fixed on September at the appropriate time, but we do need something coming back which brings it all together and how we're going to progress jointly in partnership with all the organisations.
Thank you, Ian. Lewis.
Well, I think my main issues, which I hope that Peter will take up on behalf of the best interests of everybody in Greater Cambridge and people travelling in, are about 4. So the first issue is that we already have effectively a focus as the Greater Cambridge Partnership amongst several elements on what I'm calling Zone 2, which is the routes going out to west, out towards Camborne, southeast, past Babraham, or in that general direction, subject to the consultation. We've got a discussion later in the agenda on the A10, where I see the Greater Cambridge Partnership's role as being the spearhead on non-road, and we'll come on to that, but clearly that involves how do we get high quality public transport up to Waterbeach, and how do we get cars off the Milton Road roundabout where it hits the A14. And also I'm expecting that we'll come forward with particularly a route out to the east, or a discussion about the whole issue of transport in and out from the east of Cambridge. And clearly several other routes and existing projects, including Milton Road, Histon Road. So my issue, which I just want us to make sure, is that both in agreeing with the Mayor what the future delivery is, and ensuring this ability to deliver 4 linkages with the potential CAM and possible tunnel entrances and all sorts of elements of that project, that we focus on what we've already done and what we're building on, obviously subject to consultation and further community input, of saying that the GCP has a particular role in that, basically the surface network, that if CAM can deliver the tunnels, that the GCP can deliver the surface routes, and still got some way to go on the need there. So that was point 1. Point 2 is, as Mr. Tunstall has said, a lot of people drive to the edge of Cambridge, and there does need to be interchanges. As Tim Bickers said, we have to think about public transport. We don't want to have some form of cannibalised system, which means that we don't have good bus and other routes out. But we do need to be looking and continuing to look at park and rides or versions of that, simply because we have to get people out of their cars before they come in. And again, I just hope that we are, obviously we've got several elements of that in the different projects, but that we have an overall strategy there. The third element, which was prompted by the late publication, and it was late, of the Steer Davis Gleave report, and I know officers sought to get it moving earlier, but in the timing it was squeezed. I specifically want there to be the opportunity for a dialogue on some of the challenge and options, including community input, as part of this next phase. So my third point is just to ask the GCP officers to facilitate a discussion, to make sure that there is a discussion with the appointed contractors, because we do have expertise in this city. As one of my councillor colleagues said, when somebody comes up to you and says in Cambridge that they're an expert, well, sometimes they might be bluffing, but sometimes they're a world expert, and obviously there's quite a lot of expertise out there. And a lot of people have done a lot of thinking about some of these issues, and I don't think there was a proper opportunity to have that dialogue albeit that I'm confident that the scheme as proposed in this report is the better one. And my final issue is money. The next phase does need to include the deliverability and fundability of this scheme. And whilst that is being taken on by the Mayor, and I respect both the Mayor's leadership on this, but also the fact that there's probably only room for one boss in the sense of one organisation leading the core project. I just want us to ensure that when we look at the terms of reference, that there's a very clear output on the fundability of this project, because it's good to have a timescale. It might be optimistic, but it's good to have a tough and ambitious timescale, but it has to be predicated also on getting it funded. So those are my 4 points, and I just really want to record those and get those included as part of our input into the brief, as well as specifically, Chair, saying we are the potential deliverers of the surface routes, as well as needing to continue to deliver connections between communities and Cambridge and between new housing and new jobs.
Thank you, Lewis. Catherine, do you feel you've been able to get those for the minutes? Because I think it's important that Lewis's 4 points get recorded. And Lewis, whether you want to see them quickly in draft.
No, that's fine. I mean, what it
published.
underlines really is that we want to work in partnership with the Mayor. It's our job to work in partnership in this project. We've already invested significant effort, money, time. We want to build on that. We want to get the best value out of that. And as I said in response to Tim Bitt, we want to make sure that we continue to be a voice for Greater Cambridge, and we make sure that all of the other voices in Greater Cambridge get a say in this.
Thank you. I welcome this report, and I will be supporting the recommendations. My main sort of comment really is it would be a great shame if this then went into a sort of, I won't call it a black hole, but just went quiet for 6 months whilst Davis Gleave wrote their report. And I'd be interested to see how much we can do in parallel. I'm very taken by the vehicle, and whether there is any early development we can have on the sort of vehicle that there might be, whether we can get it for, I knew it was operating in China, I didn't know about Rouen. We've got the guided busway going up to St Ives in particular, and is there anything we can do with testing vehicle on that? I know it's a different physical surface, but it would be interesting to see if we can at least do some parallel processing and see if we can test different sorts of vehicles in parallel. Whether that's for the transport side or whether that's for the smart work stream is an interesting debate, which perhaps we can come back to, but the smart work stream could consider helping there. But my general view is to welcome all of this, and I'm going to take the board back to page 23, 2.1. What we tend to do, actually, Claire, I haven't warned you this, but before the voting members have a vote, we do tend to ask the non-voting members, if they had a vote, which way would they vote? Just to, out of courtesy, but also to inform the voting members. So if you had a vote on the recommendations on 2.1, which way would you be voting?
I would support the recommendations, Chair.
Great, thank you. And then I think we've reached the practice that we like to vote simultaneously around the table. So I'll say to the voting members, are you happy with the recommendations put in 2.1?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. So we now move on to agenda item 8, for which there are no public questions. This is the A10 Foxton level crossing bypass and travel hub. This is on page 37, so we can go straight into Chris presenting this to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report's in front of you to actually bring Foxton onto your programme. When we developed the original programme a few years ago, Foxton was there or thereabouts, but didn't quite manage to get into the programme. Since then, there's a number of initiatives in the area. There's park and ride development at Trumpington M11, Junction 11 interchange. There's potential around the Cambridge South Station. There's the growth, as we know, that's ongoing around CBC. So we brought this report to you to seek your approval to actually start working on a proposal to look to bypass the existing level crossing at Foxton. There has been a proposal around to bypass the level crossing since 1927, but more recently, I suppose, a bit more recently, work was done in 2013 on by Network Rail on what they term their GRIP, up to their GRIP 2 level, which is Governments for Railway Investment Programme. That is 4 years out of date, 5 years out of date. To be fair, all they were particularly interested in was the railway. They weren't interested in anything else in terms of the A10 itself. They were, laudably, obviously, very interested in safety, and that's their key criteria. We, of course, have a number of other objectives that we need to look at, so it's not just a matter of taking their GRIP 2 work that was done by McDonald's, but it's a matter of looking at that work and transitioning that into a programme that actually meets with your objectives. In addition to that, we are looking to make sure that we make best use of the station and as such integrate it fully into the existing network. So you probably noticed there have been a number of car parking spaces at the station being talked about. In the GRIP 2 it was 85, we've looked at rural travel hubs and they were talking 35 to 40. We think there's a need for far more, and as part of this work we will be looking to increase the parking and make it more of a travel hub, which would obviously have benefit for the A10 as you get further into Cambridge, where we can actually get traffic off the A10 at an earlier stage. We are looking at the potential for both an underpass and a bridge. There is no proposal at the moment. This will be part of the work to look at just an underpass or just a bridge. We will be looking at both. To put it into context as why we need to look at this, we aren't a highway authority, that's the county council. We don't look to promote highway schemes in terms of additional road space for cars. We're looking to promote growth. The problem we've got here is that we've got 16,000 vehicles a day on average coming down the A10. It is one of only 2 routes that suffered significant increase in traffic volumes over the last 5 years, the other one being Histon Road. The rest of the routes are already at capacity, and what people are tending to do is find whichever way round they can. There's been an overall increase in 10%, but apart from a few odd percentage points on the other major arterials, the A10 has found a big increase in the amount of vehicle usage. The barrier comes down for 4 trains an hour, but that's going to be increased to 6 trains an hour. Of course, the other issue which we will be factoring in is East-West Rail and the implications of East-West Rail. At the moment, the barrier can be down for in excess of 30 minutes in the hour, so there is extensive queuing occurring there, all of which affects the economy and the potential growth of the economy. We are in discussions with Network Rail. I have to be clear at this moment in time. Network Rail do not see this as a safety issue when they put it through their formula that they've got. They say they see it as very low risk. I feel if you increase the number of trains by 50%, the amount of downtime by 50%, then people will start taking more risks. So I think the safety angle is something that they should be reconsidering. And whilst they haven't been very positive in coming forward with suggestions of contribution, we will certainly be talking to them and DFT, because it is something that the Department for Transport will have a key role in the future, because improvement monies for railways will go to the Department for Transport in future and not Network Rail. The cost benefit, whilst it's very early days, but based on the original work that was done and updating very briefly, very loosely updating the figures to today's figures, looks exceptionally good. It's in the region of 2.5 to 3.5, depending on which alternative you go for, whether it be an underpass or a bridge. The timetable is shown in 6.2. We are doing a fair amount of work because, as I say, the report is there, but the report is very much predicated on Network Rail's objectives, not on our objectives. So there needs to be a lot more work on that, not only to bring it up to date, but to align it with our requirements and specifically travel hub requirements. So we will be looking to come back in December of this year and then go out to consult early next year. I'll be happy to take any comments from the board, Chair.
So we'll do questions for clarification. Should we start with you, Ian, this time?
I've visited this site so many times, I think I've run out of questions for clarification over the last 10 years.
Lewis?
What? No
Clarification,
questions.
yeah. Claire, any questions for clarification? So shall I throw it open to comment? Claire?
So I, until recently, was travelling this route every day of the week. It used to hold me up quite a lot, but in the past I would have always said this was a lower priority to fix than several of our other routes that we're considering. However, the case is made for me in the paper with the growth of both traffic and the number of trains per hour. I think that provided two things. One, that the work is very carefully and thoughtfully integrated with the travel hub work and with the Junction 11 work, which both have direct implications there, and also that Network Rail is involved both financially and thoughtfully, then I think this is sounding very promising, and the sooner the better to get something done.
Thank you.
Well, going back to 2015, when we were assessing the priorities for 5 years, we did have a close look at this. And at that stage, the indication was that Network Rail were possible funders. So I wouldn't want us to lose a discussion with Network Rail. I think we're learning that bringing schemes forward a stage and inputting into projects like Cambridge South Rail Station are all very useful, but there's still a challenge in here. Are we the only people who should be funding this? So clearly it is a travel blockage in terms of just journeys, and but it's a question of coming to the next stage and then making a decision. I wouldn't want it to be inferred that we're making a hard commitment to this, because there'll be other projects I think we need to assess against it. And I do think that whilst Network Rail has plenty of projects, that they should be looking to make this safer.
Thank you.
I can confirm that this actually was on Network Rail's bidding, and certainly was in their budget at the time. It was removed at the time, and therefore fully support actually going forward. But we do need to be conscious of the financial implications, and therefore we must seek Network Rail's support financially for this. I also question, by the way, the safety, because having been down there on many occasions and discussions with the parish council and community, there is a safety issue there today. And the issue actually is, it's not just the barrier that comes down. It has a small gate, which is what I call done by a magnet, okay? There has been that considerable discussion about that particular safety issue. And I think I would ask Peter Blake to bring that back to Network Rail, because that has been a problem for some time. It has been resolved, but it is actually, I think, quite a severe risk still today because of the age of the gate there. And there has been some incidents around there for not just this year's, but other years as well. And I think picking up all the points about the traffic, which I think are already there, I think the issues are, one, finance, two, safety, because there are also rights of way, which are a couple of feet, almost about 100 yards towards Royston as well, and that was also being discussed and closed as part of Network Rail's process. So I think, although I support the recommendations, I think there's still a lot of work and discussions with Network Rail, and how that is proceed, I think is important as we go forward. But support the recommendations as they're laid out. I'd be interested to see from Hertfordshire County Council, bearing in mind Royston is not in our county, about their developments in that part of the world, because that will add, I think, the volume perhaps in the number of houses that they've got, which may help us considerably in determining the number of car parking spaces that we might need. I think we do need to future-proof it and allow for maybe, as happened in the past when we've done park and ride sites, we've actually allocated, well, today it might be 500, but actually allocate for the future to add more capacity at a later date. I think we need to think of that in the longer term as well in this area, but fully support the recommendations.
Thank you. I mean, I think there's so many things going on at Foxton, isn't it? And actually, I think we've moved on a long way since Network Rail in 2013, because you've got the safety aspect of the level crossing, which is number one, which per se is not necessarily or not really at all our remit. You've got traffic going up the A10, that traffic that we cannot stop going up the A10. It would be better if it flowed quicker up the A10. But I think what we can add, and what I really welcome, is the concept of modal shift, which of course Network Rail weren't really interested in. And we are adding the concept that this is not, as it were, merely a bridge or an underpass. It's a rural travel hub concept is being developed and pushed into this. The 85 spaces that Network Rail previously done, I think we're all agreeing it's much more than that. I was interviewed quite aggressively by Dottie McLeod on Radio Cambridge, wasn't I? And she said, for goodness sake, 85, get real, it should be many more than that. And I completely and utterly agreed with her on that. It should be a rural travel hub. But then we should go further. If it's going to be a rural travel hub, it then comes into the concept of what cycle routes you have from other villages into the rural travel hub and what other things might go there and where it goes in the area. I know some land is owned by the county council, which might help, others is private. So what I welcome is the fact that we're going to take, I hate that word holistic, but a much more holistic view than this previous May 2013 Network Rail approach. And I think that's what's good about it. That's been explained to me, if you go on page 43, why it does take between now and December to come back, because effectively we're starting again, if I understand Chris and Peter, we're building on the work that Network Rail has done, but we're going to take it off in a different direction. People that live in Harston or Hawkston, I hope, will be pleased by this, because the intention is to have fewer cars actually going up the A10, even though we are potentially building a bridge or an underpass. So I thoroughly approve of this, and I think it's really, really good, and I will be supporting the recommendation. I don't know if there's any more people that want to enter the debate, or we move to a vote. So, Claire, if you had a vote, how would you be voting?
I would vote positively. I would consider adding to recommendation B in collaboration with Network Rail. There is no mention of Network Rail in the recommendation, so just a question or suggestion.
So we put in collaboration with Network Rail at the end of 2.1b. Would any officer have a problem with that? Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, for that amendment. I'm happy to support the recommendation as laid out and that amendment.
And so am I.
Like the Assembly, so am I.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we now move on to agenda item 9, which is the Ely to Cambridge A10 transport study, which starts on page 135. I've got Maureen Mace, who wants to ask a question on this. Maureen. Hello.
The proposed widening of the A10 is by its nature a road-orientated approach. At the present time, I understand 60% of people working at the Science Park arrive by car, and the new widened road will encourage more. How will parking be restricted at the Science Park and in the north of Cambridge, and how will you get the modal shift onto other forms of transport, especially as the train at the relocated station at Waterbeach will not be near the A10 and is situated to the north of the village?
Thank you, Maureen. So, like before, I'll start off by answering, but Chris or Peter may want to come in. I think there are essentially three parts to your question. How will parking be restricted at the Science Park? Well, at one level, that's pretty difficult because the Science Park is privately owned. They're not adopted roads adopted by the Highway Authority. They're private roads, so we can't put WO lines on them or anything like that. But you can do it through planning restrictions. So if the owners of the Science Park want to build new buildings or something like that as part of the planning restrictions or planning permission, there could possibly be restrictions. So there's a particular point in your question of the Science Park, which is the ownership of their private roads. But planning might be able to help. Your second point about parking being restricted in the north of Cambridge. Now, if you mean the sort of Chesterton area, that sort of area of North Cambridge, as you'll be aware, Greater Cambridge Partnership is very keen on residents' parking zones and asking members of these particular zones, residents in these zones, whether they want to create a residents' parking zone or not. We've consulted on 4 so far. I think the long list has got 24 potential zones all over the city. There are 3 in Chesterton, and they will come in, I'm told, phase 3 of our consultation. So in spring 2019, in spring next year, there will be consultations on 3 residence parking zones in the Chesterton area. So that might answer the second part of your question about north of Cambridge. And the third part of your question is how do you get the modal shift onto other forms of transport? Well, Maureen, that's what we're all about. I mean, the whole point of what we want to do in every single aspect of our work at the Greater Cambridge Partnership is effectively to get modal shift, people out of cars. And I'm going to ask questions later or bring a highlight on the rest of this report. The report that we're going to talk about on the A10 has been construed, particularly in the press, as basically about dual carriageways and not much else. But actually, inside it is a proposal also for the Cam Metro going up north of Cambridge up to Waterbeach and possibly up to Ely as well. So the particular way of getting modal shift is to get people onto the Cam Metro and not on the A10 at all. And that will come up, I think, in a moment. I don't know if Chris or Peter want to add anything to that answer. I'm sorry, Maureen, you have to just switch your microphone off.
That's it. Thank you for that. The only thing I'd add, and I will come back to the multimodal part of the study because there is more to it than just about roads. I appreciate a lot of it talks about roads, but the first option is far more than that. Obviously, it will be integrated as well with the work that we're doing on Milton Road. So when we talk about the residents' parking zones, the control parking zones, we will be integrating that in with what we're doing with Milton Road. So Paul Vanderbilk, who you know, he will be dealing with that as well, although it will be the parking team that he'll be liaising with. But in terms of the rest of what you've said, Chair, I'd confer that that's correct.
Thank you, Maureen. I'm terribly sorry, and I'm not going to be rude. The answer is no. There is no provision for follow-up questions. So, well, you can ask us separately by email, but I'm afraid not. Chris, do you want to introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. The report you've got in front of you is the results of the major transport study that we've done on the A10. This was funded not fully by the Greater Cambridge Partnership, but the vast majority of that was funded by the Greater Cambridge Partnership. It is the start, it's the start of the conversation about A10, and what we're looking at obviously is what's going up what's going along the A10. So we've got, as we've already mentioned, we've got Cambridge North, Cambridge Northern Fringe, we've got the Science Park, we've got the growth at Ely, we've got Waterbeach. There's 17,500 homes predicted by 2031, additional homes, and 9,500 jobs by, as I say, by 2031. What you're being asked to do is to endorse these findings, having taken the report, and commend them to the Combined Authority. It is a scheme that is very much a strategic scheme that we feel that the Combined Authority, subject to your agreement, should be looking at. There is a slight issue that you may wish to consider, and that is option 1, which is the multimodal, because that is the sort of work that we have been doing elsewhere, and it is the work that we feel we can do on behalf of the Combined Authority. So it was a multimodal study, notwithstanding the comment I made earlier that, yes, if you look at it at a quick glance, it looks as very much road orientated. It did look at the overall transport requirements. It looked specifically at the growth at Waterbeach and the growth at Northern Fringe and the Science Park. And as Maureen has said, the Science Park is a major issue in terms of the amount of parking that goes on there. But I think just to add to what was said and what was asked, certainly from a planning point of view, the planners will use this report when planning discussions are being held, particularly around Northern Fringe and the Science Park. And their view very much is that the mode is not going to be by car. So their planning constraints that they will put in will be anything but the car. But that obviously will be for the future. So it is a strategic outline business case that's been done, and the full report is as at Appendix 1. The first phase of doing the work, they actually tested without any mitigation what the impact of these 17,500 homes and 9,500 jobs would have on the A10. And I think it doesn't surprise anybody to find it just came to a grinding halt. The A10 is already well congested. We have to have the proof, though. I know comments are made, well, it didn't take a blind man to work that one out. But we have to have the proof. So that had to be done, and it's there. It just demonstrated what we already knew. And what is happening, we know a lot of people are leaving the A10 and finding other routes to get into Cambridge. In terms of the second stage, that was when they looked to put the mitigation measures in, the transport mitigation measures, to make sure that what development we had up there would actually work on the A10 with its mitigation measures. In paragraph 47 on, it talks about the key issues, and the key issues are, as I've already said, the road is at capacity. People are finding other roads. 79% of the traffic currently on the road, so that's currently, is actually not generated from adjacent to the road. It's outside the study area. So 79% is coming onto the road and then going off the road at the other end. So 4/5 of the traffic isn't local traffic in the sense of people or businesses living around that area. From North Cambridge and the Science Park, this goes back to the point I made earlier. There needs to be a policy of radical parking restraint, and that's very clear. So hopefully the question that Maureen's raised, you get some satisfaction. That has been clearly identified. The other thing that isn't there but needs to be said, the A14 Milton interchange acts as a choke. There's only a limited amount of traffic that can get through there, so all the queuing occurs on the north side, which is great in terms of not necessarily adjacent to all the housing and so on, but it still means that traffic is going to come down. It's just in a more steadier flow down Milton Road. So it does act as a choke, which in some senses is beneficial. In terms of the outcomes, there were 6 mitigation packages that are in the report. Option 1 is the modal shift. And that's the option that the consultants are recommending needs to be done regardless. You need to do the modal shift before you do anything else. And what they're actually proposing there is that we look at public transport, a public transport corridor, a rapid transit corridor from Waterbeach down to the Science Park area and then linking onto the busway.
And Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but people might want to turn to page 186 in the pack. Sorry to interrupt, but the map on page 186, and you'll probably take us through the rest, is I think, takes us to exactly what you're talking about, Chris.
Okay. So in terms of that route comes down an existing old line and joins in from Waterbeach to Cambridge Science Park. Now that, we've had the CAM report, that would be predicated on CAM Mass Rapid Transit. It could run other public transport, but that's been recommended as critical. It also recommends that the station is relocated. Network Rail are keen to relocate the station and put additional parking in. The reason being they can make it more workable from the point of view of the station itself, but more importantly from our point of view, it brings it closer to the new town. So in that sense, it's far better, and it will be a travel hub in its own right. It's interesting to note that the park and ride will be on the A10, and there are questions about why isn't the park and ride and the railway parking one and the same. For the simple reason, as drivers, and we probably all recognise it where we are drivers, drivers do not want to go any further than they need to go to get into a park and ride. They will not go off route easily to get into a park and ride. The second point is that to actually get them to drive to the station means pulling them all through Waterbeach, which is not an ideal proposition for people that live there. So they will be two distinct car parks. Having said that, there is no reason at all why people want to use the rail. They will drive to it, but we need both. We don't just need the one. And then obviously cycling and walking is a key part of the mitigation as well, and that's option one. Option two, as you work through the diagrams, talks about junction improvements. So these are where the road schemes start. So option two is about junction improvements on the A10 itself, and then option three is about dualling the A10 but north up to Ely. The reason for that is actually, it may sound perverse, but the reason for that is that gets them into the park and ride. That's why you don't dual south, you want to dual north, but it gets them into the park and ride. And then if you must, you look to dual south, and then the logic is you dual all of it. The sixth option is actually the most radical: build a new road. Now this is being commended to the combined authority. The cost and benefits are shown in figure 1 in the report itself. The full package itself is 500 million. That's not the new road, that's just dualling everything and putting your public transport options in as well. The individual costs are shown in table 2. So the next steps, as I say, is subject to you commending it to the CA. They will be looking to consult on these proposals, and then from that consultation they will further develop the options and start fine-honing the options down to the most appropriate option. From a GCP perspective, we're very clear as officers that option 1 has to be the key option to start with. We've had so many years as to be unbelievable. We all know building more roads just attracts more traffic. It doesn't resolve the problem. The M25 has now got 4 or 5 lanes, and it is still the biggest car park in Europe. So we do need to look at trying to get that modal shift as well. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, from the board.
Well, I might kick off this time round. If we go to that map on page 186, I think what may become significant in the context of CAM Metro is where you say Cambridge Science Park, where the C of Cambridge is, Chris, if I'm right, that is where there is an existing underpass under the A10. The green line goes adjacent to a traveller camp, but not through it, but just adjacent to it, north. And if you go through the underpass under the A10, I think you're on the sort of back of Cambridge Regional College, and therefore you're barely 100 or 200 yards away from the existing guided busway, which might or might not get converted to a CAM Metro route, and leads, not a million miles away from the Cambridge North Railway Station and Milton Road, which we hope to improve. So I think that that C, where Cambridge Science Park is, could be a pretty relevant thing to the consultation exercise. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
Totally, Chair. I mean, the proposal would be to link it to the existing busways that we've got, and how they are then converted in the future to CAM. That would make sure we have that integrated approach.
And then, if the board would indulge me, I'd like to take you to page 145. Members of the public might want to look at page 145 as well, which is a graph that Chris and I have worked on together. And I think this tries to give graphically some numbers which are later in the pack, I think on there about page 60 or 65 of the report. What this is basically saying at the top in DS1, this is CAM Metro or something similar, an off-road route to take Maureen's point. This is the off-road route that we want to do. Moving the railway station, putting in a greenway or something like that, putting in pedestrian routes. What this says is it costs you the red block, which is about 82 million quid, but the benefits that are calculated under recommended ways of doing it, the benefit of that is 208 million. So just you can see graphically and economically, it just makes complete and utter sense with a ratio of, I don't know, 3 times or something like that, that the off-road route with moving the railway station and the cycleway and everything like that is just, it seems to me, very, very, very easy to justify. If you then move down to DS2, as well as doing what I've just been talked about, you improve these 6 junctions or 8 junctions. They're on a page 187, they're the orange dots. You improve the junctions, not doing any dualling or anything like that, you're just improving the junctions. What's interesting is it costs you the extra brown, the 40 million, but it makes you a benefit of the extra blue, which is 227 million. So the ratio there is 5 times the benefit to cost ratio of moving from DS1 to DS2. It's absolutely economically sensible. Having done all of that as well, you then go on to DS3, which is doing the north bit, which is your point about getting people from the north into the park and ride at Waterbeach. You spend an extra bit, which is the yellow, and you get the very light blue back. I don't know what that is, about a 3 times ratio. DS4, if you dual the southern bit, numbers are quite small on dualing the southern bit, actually. A little bit of yellow and a little bit of light blue. It's still a 2 times ratio, but the numbers are a lot smaller. And then finally, at the very bottom, you do absolutely everything, and you are spending, I don't know what's that, about 275 million, and you are getting 750 million of benefit, so a sort of 3 times ratio. So, Chris, you and I worked on that graph as trying to be a way of graphically distilling not the soft sides, the benefits to pollution, the benefits to congestion, everything like that, but just the hard economic numbers. And they really, really, really seem to me to support and endorse this. And so that's why when we finish questions of clarification, which this was, and move on to the debate, I think I'll be very much in favour of this.
Chair, that's correct. I think it does graphically illustrate. It actually shows that DS4, whilst it does provide some benefits, it's purely carbon benefits. So it doesn't actually shift anybody anywhere. It just saves a bit of time for some of the cars coming in, which in itself is good. I think just to clarify, in case people are confused, the way we have to work from a technical point of view, we have to discount our prices back, or our costs back, to 2010. So that graph is actually the 2010 price, which is why it doesn't add up to 500 million. That's in table 2, that's demonstrating that. So in case there was any confusion about why there's a difference in price.
Does any other members of the board have questions of clarification? Lewis.
To ask Chris Tunstall, looking at page 144, given that our primary interest is modal shift and enabling people to get out of what is currently gridlock when the A10 hits the junction with the A14, how does that first column split, the sort of mode shift column? Do we have any breakdown? Because shouldn't we be thinking as GCP what our role is here? So how does the 151 million split? and what are the priorities that the GCP needs to look at? Because if you can't answer my question, I think we should be getting an answer as soon as we can.
Okay, Chair. My colleagues will quickly look, but my understanding is that 52 million of that 152 million is the actual transport corridor itself. There is then obviously a number of other things in terms of cycling and walking. Normally they're quite small, so I'm working on the basis that the balance of that is working on the park and ride and on the rail travel hub and our contributions to the rail move. Yes. That was, so that we can give you a full breakdown if that's what you want, but that's...
We should publish...
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, Chair.
An early estimate is the expected role of the GCP, because there are several parties in this on that, and as follow-up, who is seen as the funder, and what's the expected process on some of the other aspects, like the junction improvements and the work outside of Greater Cambridge, in addition to just commenting that clearly the benefits, as Francis Burkett has identified, are particularly about modal shift here, and we just can't keep on building roads that run extra capacity of cars straight into that roundabout.
So I'm going to possibly, this may be the answer, page 209.
Yep.
This may help a bit.
I'm grateful that you've looked harder into this.
Yeah, but there's a table at the bottom, table 12, and I think what this is saying is that the cost of moving Waterbeach Station is 17.5 million. Cost of building a park and ride at Waterbeach is 8.1 million. The cost of what I'm going to call greenways, pedestrian and cycle, is 12.1 million. The public transport corridor, which I'm going to call the Cam Metro route, is 51.2 million. And it looks like a small amount of work at the Milton Road junction for 2.5 million. So that's quite an interesting table, isn't it? 50 million is the Cam Metro, and the rest, yeah, there's the numbers.
Well, the reason I'm a bit confused is that if you look at the figure on page 144, we've got a package estimate for DS1 of 151, or best average 152 million, yet this list, if you look across, Francis, doesn't add up to even 100 million.
No, it's nearer the 82 at the 2010 prices.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is 2010 prices.
Well,
I'm
perhaps
just
we
a bit,
need
I'm a
some
bit baffled,
clarification.
because if you look at the legend at the top of the table, it says 2017.
I agree. Perhaps
So
we're doing it in real time.
The reason I think we need to look into this and dig further is we just have to have a concept about, well, what is this corridor in terms of outline cost? And clearly there's a whole bunch of elements in this project which are not ones for us, including the road capacity and it extending up to Ely. So I just think we need to be clearer and publish what is the intended strategy. And if that consists of a further report for information, I just think that will be valuable, because this is a key element in linking up the homes in Waterbeach as well as in sustainable transport. We haven't given great thought to the north until this project and this study was published.
Thank you. Ian, you're waving.
If I can help, I think it would be useful. This morning, this was also discussed at Cambridgeshire County Council. I totally agree with what Lewis is saying. There are several elements to this in respect to Waterbeach, which of course is where the development is, and discussions with the developer in relationship to Section 106. There is also discussions, as you might say, within Cambridgeshire County Council, about the areas which are not in the GCP area, which is the further north area as well. So my suggestion actually is looking at the two officers who are sitting opposite who were at the meeting this morning, that perhaps we could take that way and try to actually assist in that breakdown, I think, is what you're getting about who has the responsibility, where does it fit in respect of Section 106, where does it fit further north or further south, where does the dualling fit, etc., etc. And I think maybe that might be sensible rather than get into too much detail, because there are figures there, as you said, Mr. Chairman, within it, but maybe they just need checking out and ensuring that those are all right and proper. But certainly we were alive to it this morning, I think, as well as this afternoon.
Thank you. Lewis.
Well, I just ask if Rachel, as our Chief Executive, just takes that issue away. Clearly, there are several parties in this, and there is a wider public concern about the complexity of some of these projects and how many different players are involved. So it may well be, Ian, that it would be beneficial to have a joint meeting with those Cambridge county councillors that are looking at other aspects, so that we can essentially just at some level just shape and make a commitment on behalf of GCP that this is the zone that we want to focus on.
I'm entirely happy with that. As it goes forward, there was much discussion this morning, there's much discussion this afternoon. Maybe we need to have one discussion, not two discussions, as you might say, as we go forward. Perhaps the point I also wanted to make, actually, there was also much discussion this morning about developments in Littleport, because although this particular report talks of Ely to Cambridge, there was, of course, a report done from Ely to King's Lynn, and therefore that was also a matter for some discussion at this morning's meeting, which I think is important, actually, that we perhaps, that you are aware what's happening, as you might say, not just in Ely, but actually what happened in Littleport as well. And there is much development there as well. We're currently building a new secondary school and a special school there because of the size of the development there, which all adds to the A10 issue. There was much discussion, by the way, this morning in respect of the table, which you've got before you, the option 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So there was that sort of discussion that we had this morning about modal shift, which was certainly an issue about moving the railway station, about cycling, about walking, about dedicated areas, and obviously the dualling issues as well. I think we want to be careful in not just actually discussing back to one element, i.e. a road, because there are many elements to it, rail being just one of them. I'm happy to ask the officers to bring something back and bring that and circulate that to members of the board. And the Assembly, I think, would be useful, Mr. Chairman, not just us, but for the Assembly as well, and ask the officers to do just that, and therefore give a comprehensive response rather than discuss it perhaps at length today.
Thank you. We're segueing into, I think, our general discussion, if everyone is happy on that. Claire, I don't know if you've got anything, your predecessor, Mark, was always quite rightly, from a business perspective, interested in all of these numbers and the benefit ratios.
I think it's a good report, clearly. The objective for me is access between homes to the north of the region and the jobs and education and everything else that may not be just at the north of Cambridge on the science park. They may well be to the south or the east or the west of Cambridge. So modal shift is possible for those going from home to some of the greater Cambridge hubs, but not for those travelling the A10 because of the connection to the A14, the M11. So we've got to look at the whole package, not just the modal shift, which will achieve something, but as we've heard from the numbers, not all of it. If GCP can focus on those travelling from the A10 to the Cambridge hubs by any means, then that's obviously a hugely worthwhile project. But for the people who are travelling because the A10 is a route to somewhere beyond the north of Cambridge, then we need to look at those as well. Fully appreciate that GCP cannot afford to do full dualling of every road that we want to, so sharing that responsibility is clearly the sensible thing to do, and very happy with the recommendations that are in here.
Great, thank you. Is there anything else anyone wants to add? So if I take us to the recommendation on page 139, recommendation 2, Claire, what would your views be?
I support it.
Right, thank you. So I'll ask Ian, Lewis and myself, are we happy with the recommendations on page 139, 2A and 2B?
Agreed.
Agreed, agreed. So we move on to agenda item 10, our big conversation on page 229. And we have got a question, James. You've been very patient.
Afternoon, everyone. One of the more encouraging findings of the big conversation is the apparent willingness of commuters to ditch their cars in favour of public transport, provided that a high-quality public transport service was available. The report sets out improvements in public transport that will be needed: more routes, reliability, cheaper, frequency of service, free parking at Park and Ride, and so on. This gives us an idea of what needs to be done to encourage modal shift, but herein lies the problem. For all these measures will greatly increase operating costs, and actually we've heard already several times this afternoon, firstly from Chris about the 25 million that's subsidising the metro in Newcastle and Tyneside, and the council spoke earlier about also the affordability and viability. And the elephant in the room seems to be about where is that income going to come from to support the public transport improvements that people want to see and which will generate modal change. So the only realistic source of sustainable long-term funding is for drivers to pay if they choose to drive, rather than use the upgraded transport system that would be provided. So in other words, if you choose to drive, then you choose to pay. And actually this is also recognised in the report itself in 5.10 and 5.11, that the public themselves recognise that fact. So in light of this, is it not now time that the GCP board face up to this realism and commission the research to devise a fair, equitable and non-discriminatory charging system, possibly in combination with a pollution charge to improve air quality, which would then be the subject of public consultation? So I think we and others are not asking you to commit to a charging scheme. We're asking for the GCP to commission research into the options, feasibility and practicalities of introducing an equitable and non-discriminatory system, including the revenues that this could generate to support the high-quality public transport system that people want. The information should then be used to inform transport planning for Cambridge, and any recommendations by the research would then be subject to public consultation. Thank you.
So, James, thank you. So you'll be pleased to know that you're behind the curve and we're ahead of you. I don't know if you were at, I think it was our last but one board meeting, which we held in the Christ-Pearson room at Shire Hall, where Tim Bick asked a question, and we said that a report would be coming in March to our next meeting. So a report is coming in March. So taking your question in turn, is it time the GCP board faced up to realism we have already? Should we commission research? Well, in the sense of one big fat telephone sort of directory-sized piece of research, no, we're not doing that. But there is a lot of elements of research being commissioned to inform the paper that is coming to the board in March. So, broadly speaking, there's an answer yes. Combination with pollution charge, we've been talking about pollution charge for 6 months. It's absolutely on the agenda for the city access. So something will be coming to the executive board in March. It's all wrapped up in our future investment strategy, which is effectively what we're going to, what we might do for the next 10 years. But you won't get any proposals or suggestions or schemes or anything like that. What you will get is some ideas for effectively, I don't know what we're going to call it. It's a sort of big conversation too. It's taking the big conversation onto a further step, whether it's a small conversation or a second conversation, I don't know. But effectively, it's a conversation with the public along the lines of what you've said. So you will be delighted to hear we're ahead of you. I don't know if, Rachel, you want to add anything, or have I summarised that correctly? Great. Thank you. So we now move on to the agenda paper, our big conversation, page 229, and I can't remember who's going to... Rachel's going to say a few words on that.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm just going to say a couple of things and then hand over to Mike Soper, who's from the County Council's Research Unit, who's pulling this together for us in terms of analysis. But really just to flag to the board that this sort of multi-channel campaign took place in the autumn and has been really successful, as I think you will see with the interim results that are in front of you, to engage stakeholders and the wider community in a way that we haven't done before, and was actually about rising to the challenge that you and the Assembly set us to create a better evidence base on which we could make decisions about our future investment. And I think that, you know, the case has been proven that we now have got a much strengthened evidence base, both qualitative and quantitative data that support some of the other work that we've been doing as well. And under the banner of our big conversation, we've now received well over 10,000 responses, which I think just shows, you know, what a good job we were able to do to get people to engage with us through a range of different means, really. So they included a campaign for getting public feedback. So we had our big conversation events as well as a survey. We've also then had a computer-aided telephone interview, which is specifically about travel survey data, with a representative sample of over 1,000 Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire residents, run by industry expert Sistra. And then a wider, more self-selecting public travel survey, which we are still analysing the results of. So in combination, this gives you a really rich source of data from which to draw in terms of your future decisions. So Mike will just give you some of the highlights from that, but it is contained in, hopefully, an easy-to-read publication that we've produced to summarise some of those findings. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. So I think we thank particularly Beth and Neve for getting the data, and then we thank Mike for analysing it for us. So, Mike.
There you go. Yeah, thanks. Yes, so yeah, Beth certainly did a great job in terms of getting the level of responses up. So I've really just followed on behind that and just doing the analysis. In terms of what's there in the report, well, it's comprehensive in terms of the numbers of people involved, and what I've done then is trying to lead you through the sort of what the main findings are, particularly in the light of the future investment strategy and what's coming on afterwards. And I put strap lines in the report in order to support that. What you get there is a double-page spread balancing qualitative opinion, what people said, with then referring back to some of the data that's in the Sistra survey that Rachel referred to, or the Travel for Cambridgeshire work. A few examples through the document. Across theme 1, then there's people felt that as viable alternatives to the car were developed, then there would need to be a focus in changing individuals' behaviour. And it's not so much how you change behaviours as who we change behaviours. And then through our conversation with the public, they were identifying the sort of people who should be changing their behaviours. It's those on the school run, those on the daily car commute, and then ... you know, along. There was lots of groups that people were picking out for change. That is balanced with some of the Sistra work that then identified that actually 39% of people travelling currently saw no alternative to their current car use. So that's then we're thinking about, well, what does that 39% really think? What are the issues for them? Certainly in terms of alternatives, they didn't see any one form of transport, if you then extend into theme 2, as being superior to another. What they did want to see is an integrated network where people can move easily and seamlessly through those different modes. And they then talked about, and what we've underlined that with, is the differences in travel choice at the moment, depending on people's social background, depending on where they're working, and depending on their personal circumstance as well. And the third theme, all around that modal shift, theme 3, is then, when considering alternatives to the car, residents then kind of back to new routes and reliability as being the main things that are going to shift them and get them onto public transport. But there was also this, referring back briefly to the questioner, there was also this idea that people were prepared to support some of the more punitive measures that push people away from car, provided that viable alternative measures were in place. So a lot of it with around timing. Getting the viable alternatives in place and then pushing people and doing the work on modal shift and behaviour change at that point. Through themes 4 to 7, I know you got a chance to read the report anyway, so I won't go into tremendous detail, other than people then talked about the detail of how you design bus transport, how you design and improve the cycle network. and so forth, how we bring in design to improve access for people with disabilities, for example. The other two areas of beyond transport that we looked at were around housing. Significant numbers of people, 73% of people, thought they were unhappy with their current housing situation, and then talked and discussed the impact that that had in terms of housing costs on commuting choice, on housing choice, and then how that was pushing up commuting times and number of people commuting back into Cambridge. On skills theme, there were a proportion of people who are looking for new skills at any particular time, looking for new work, and they were just struggling a little bit with matching their skills to the opportunities that were then developing within the Cambridge economy, looking about, well, what can I do versus what the opportunity is there. So in summary, we've going to support this information with releasing further reports and analysis. So this is a summary, and then my team and the Travel for Cambridgeshire team have produced much lengthier documents, some of those great big thick chunks of research that we love so much, that people can then do it, and we'll be then supporting this with releasing some of that data. So we're looking at the Travel for Cambridgeshire data in particular, those 7,000 records plus, and looking at releasing an anonymised version of that so people can do their own analysis and refer back to it. And then when the board comes to reference future decisions, we'll be referencing material with this evidence base in relation to some of the decisions that we've got coming up, future investment strategy, but then some of the other decisions that we've got as well. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mike. I mean, I think it's an amazing exercise, this whole thing. The key to me is there are 10,000 people who have come back. So, I mean, this is probably one of the most comprehensive surveys of our residents in the city and the district that's ever been done, I should think, and it underpins everything. This is a very good document, but I mean, I think what you're saying is this is just trying to be a user-friendly summary. There is masses of much more detailed stuff that is publicly, that we will make publicly available if anyone wants to data mine it. But I think this is a very good readable summary as well. Do any questions? Do the board want to have either questions of clarification, or we could have the debate as well? And there's a recommendation in front of us. But any questions of clarification first for Mike? I think that's a reflection of how comprehensive it is, so thank you. So we'll now have the discussion on page 229. 221, we're asked to welcome the broad level of public engagement and note the findings. I don't know if anyone wants to have a discussion on that.
I think it's a good report. I checked in the Assembly meeting whether it was statistically relevant, some of the things that we were concluding, and the answer was firmly yes. So I'm very satisfied. I think it's been an excellent exercise. Thank you.
Great.
Well, my only issue is in further work, because obviously we've answered the question that there's going to be further work on the options to intervene and tackle the amount of cars coming into the centre of Cambridge at peak times. It's just how we, my issue is just that when we have that further work, obviously we integrate this with the work that was done on the ANPR, and clearly we just need to be able to link in both the opinions and assessment of views and priorities that come out of this study of public perceptions and views, along with the data that we've got from that week of and more of analysis, because we do have different issues in both in the centre and obviously also in particular parts of the edge of Cambridge, which are big traffic, or let's call them travel generators, because we want to shift them from cars to alternate.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think the 2 points I want to make was first, it's a summary, okay, and therefore there's a lot more behind this. This is a summary, and I think we need to be conscious of the fact that when it starts to come forward in 6 months, 9 months' time, that it is actually the reference point that we will use in the future about the summary, mainly because exactly how many people took part. I switched away from transport into, I thought, actually the housing. Actually, when you look at the housing, okay, which is on page 20, and the trouble with housing, and I think in some respects it was pleasing to see, you know, for people who, for instance, who perhaps can't get on the housing ladder or because of costs, etc., to see some of that link, because at the end of the day, transport is just an enabler. Actually, it's where you live and it's in the community you live which is actually important. So I actually quite interested actually to see perhaps a little bit more at the appropriate time in respect of the housing issues and how that actually will interplay, particularly as South Cambs and the city go forward with their local plans and their reviews of local plans, which inevitably will happen, but also not just within those two authorities, but actually further afield, because if you happen to live in Royston or Saffron Walden, it will be as important. So I'm quite interested to see maybe something in the future in respect of housing and how that interfaces with what, after all, is just an enabler, which is the transport, how you get from A to B to where you work, where do you live. And I'm quite interested to see what more people said. Appreciate this is a summary, but I'm quite interested to see that perhaps that broader picture on housing as we go forward. And I think it will be also useful for district councils and parish councils when you're looking at rural exception sites, when you're looking about where those plans might be. And I think all that actually perhaps is something that is about, well, we've done a lot of work, but actually I think this is valuable for a lot more organisations, not just us, but the combined authority, district councils, parish councils and communities generally. So I want to see it spread and the message spread a little further, Mr. Chairman, I think, and maybe that's something we need to think about as we go forward.
I think that's quite a good question for Rachel and our comms team about how widely you're going to be posting this. I think, you know, as a minimum, all city council, district councillors, whether we could put one in their pigeonholes would be an efficient way of doing it. And I think another interesting question is the extent to which we could ask FECRA to help us distribute it to residents' associations in the city, and whether the district council can help distribute it to parish councils and parish councillors in the district. We might take that away as a thought, not wanting to cut down too many trees, but it is much more powerful when you get it in printed form than just by PDF or something. Perhaps we can just take that away and think about it. I think it's a good point, Ian. Thank you. Should we move? Are we happy to move to the recommendation on page 229? Claire, if you had a vote.
Support.
Ian Lewis, you're happy to support? Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much indeed. And Beth is on holiday, isn't she? Otherwise, we'd be thanking her. And I thought Niamh was here. Niamh is here. We thank you as well. And you got your mugshot in here. And we thank everybody else who helped. So we move on to agenda item 11 on page 241. And we have got a question from District Councillor Simon Edwards, who represents Cottenham and Oakington, I think. And we don't know what your question is, Simon, so we're going to spring it upon us.
Very exciting. Yes, I represent the Cottenham ward, of which Oakington is part of it. But I really just wanted, it's more of an information sharing, really, rather than a question, Chairman, because your report invites you to consider, in recommendation 2.1, among other things, to take into consideration the parish consultation that's taken place and local knowledge. And I just wanted to help you in guiding you, really, to bring up to date with where we are locally on this. So although I'm a member of Oakington and Westwick Parish Council, I'm not speaking on behalf of them, I'm speaking as the district councillor who covers that area. But I have been very involved with their deliberations. And I have to say that we were all locally very, very encouraged, and we have always been encouraged by you repeatedly saying this is a bottom-up process. And since Oakington expressed an interest, I've been guiding them really to grab this opportunity, because I know through bitter experience, unless you get in right at the front end, this machine will take over and go off into the distance before you can actually influence it. So with that in mind, I made sure that we attended your last workshop on the rural travel hubs, and since then we hosted our own workshop locally. Now, the Parish Council were very keen to get the views of the Community Plan Group, which is very active in Oakington. They have a couple of subgroups, an Environment Action Group, and they have a Transport Action Group. So we hosted our own local workshop, which involved the Transport Action Group and the Parish Council. And what we were trying to do was to get a position where the Parish Council could take a view as to what would be acceptable and what wouldn't be acceptable, so we could inform you and guide you as to the sort of thing we were looking at. I think it's fair to say there was a universal agreement between the two parties there that we would agree on everything, like lockable cycle storage, a new path to Oakington and cycleway to Oakington, real-time information, Wi-Fi access. There were two key elements, though, that were really hotly debated. The first one was the parking aspect. There were views as to whether there should be parking there, and there were very good, strong views as to whether there shouldn't be parking there. And it was fair to say in the workshop, we actually didn't form an agreement, we didn't get a consensus. So at the following Parish Council meeting, we debated it again, and using our authority as the Parish Council, we took a view, and I'm sharing that with you now, and that was that we would accept the level of parking that was suggested in your report. And I think that's a good move forward, to have that agreement before you go off and do something and force something on the parish that perhaps it wouldn't accept. And the other key thing that was absolutely in agreement across the board was the need for the City 6 to be extended to the sites. So you've got two options in front of you, option A and option B. The most expensive option is with that City 6 link, I accept that, although I don't think it's prohibitively expensive. But I just wanted to share with you that what I wouldn't want you to do is to go off and do all that work, come back to us and say we're going to come off with option B without that City 6 link, and then the parish turn and say, sorry, that's not acceptable, we're not having it, we don't want it, and there's conflict. So I'm trying to guide us all to go down the same route and urge you to give real consideration to that option A that does have that City 6 link, because that link not only would be beneficial to people in Oakington, particularly at the far side of the village, but strategically it also links people in Girton who we know are very keen to get access to the guided bus, and indeed the City 5, which comes from Bar Hill in the evenings, could also give access to the guided bus for the evening services as well. So it's really, really important for us to have that City 6 link into the scheme. The only other thing I wanted to say, Chairman, if I may, is that I note in the report that the pilot sites may be made more of a temporary nature to actually gauge the usage and so on and so forth. I accept that. That's quite the right thing to do. But what I would like to see is that they are made permanent, if they are going to be made permanent, before any other sites are brought on board. So we don't want a temporary site forever. We want it actually made permanent as quickly as possible, if it is going to be made permanent at all.
Simon, thank you. That's very helpful, and thank you for coming along. I think what you're doing is you're girding us into action and effectively recommending that we agree the recommendation. So we will take that on board when we come to the discussion. I think you also you're very kind about our bottom-up approach, and which, as you know, I'm absolutely passionate about, and I think we're learning enormously. I mean, about the contribution that local communities can make. I mean, I think we've seen Milton Road and Histon Road, for example. The plans have changed much for the better as a result of talking to local communities. So that point is absolutely taken on board. Your specific points, I can see right over your shoulder, Mike Hill, who is the officer who has been leading this with James Blako and Kirsty Human. But Mike, did you hear everything that Simon said? And with the benefits of the minutes, I think, we'll be able to take your points on board, but particularly, but since Mike is listening, it's brilliant that Mike's in the room and would have heard it, but anyway, you can amplify it to him separately, so thank you for that. So now I ask Chris to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just add on this, that this work is very much concept work. It is new. There's not examples of it. We can go elsewhere in the country and just pick up. And just to confirm, which hopefully will be seen as very positive, it is still that bottom up. So although we've identified three potential sites, Oakington, Whittlesford and Sawston, from the point of view of taking these forwards, this will be done very, very much still in consultation extensive consultation locally with the parish council, residents, local members. So just to make that point, this is not the stop. This is not the end of the process. This is actually the start. You're on the list. We're on the blocks. Now we're working with you very carefully to develop it through. So we will take all those points on board. So the report is to note the outcome of the feasibility report that was done by Skanska into rural transport hubs, travel hubs, sorry, and agree the pilots that are in there, as I've said, 3 pilots. I'll come on to those in more detail and the implications. As per usual, it's not always as straightforward as saying, well, we'll just do these 3, but I'll come on to that in a minute. And the impact of that is that for Whittlesford, we're not actually suggesting, albeit it's been identified for a rural travel hub, we're not actually looking to develop it in isolation. We are also looking for you to agree a £50,000 contribution to do it, well, a £50,000 cost to do a transport master planning exercise for that area of Whittlesford around the station, and to contribute £70,000 to a £700,000 cycling scheme, cycle parking scheme that Bellio, Greater Anglia, have successfully achieved with the DFT. So if I can go back to where we started on this and just very briefly go through. So we contacted all the parishes in South Cambridgeshire. The consultant undertook an assessment of those parishes that were keen to go forward. It was a very high level concept. The key objectives are outlined in paragraph 4.3, and the methodology is laid out in 1.5 in the Appendix 1, the Skanska report. And then section 11, rather than going through all of this, on page 421, lists all the sites that were ranked on the basis of the analysis that we did. It was very high level. It hasn't got the detail in. That will now come, that we've identified these sites to take forward. We were initially looking for 2 sites. It is the first wave. If you like, we were looking for 2 sites to pilot, to try this out, and as has been mentioned, initially maybe to just put very temporary in, but to see if it works, and then to build on top of that if it does. And the point made is a very valid point about not forgetting that it needs surfacing when we move forward if it's successful. What we're looking to do now is the business case for these sites. The reason we've got 3, it was Oakington and Whittlesford were the first 2. We've now incorporated Sawston, and the reason that we've incorporated Sawston is Whittlesford needs a more holistic view. There is a lot going on around the station at Whittlesford, notwithstanding the cycle parking. Abellio, Greater Anglia are looking at increased car parking there to put that in, and they have an application in at the minute. Obviously, we identified it as a good place for a rural travel hub. There are developments going on, not developments that have been agreed, but there's the Agritech that is coming to planning at South Cambridgeshire shortly, and there is talk around the County Council and Highways England depot. So a lot going on, and it was felt that you couldn't just jump in and put a rural travel hub at Whittlesford. It needed more looking at. In addition to all of that, there is a massive 505 study that's been worked up with the combined authority. So what we're seeking approval for on Whittlesford is to do this transport master planning. We've been in contact with the parish council. We will be in contact with the adjacents, with Duxford as well, to actually get a more overarching view of everything that's going on. In addition, then, we're seeking approval for the £70,000 contribution. So that's why Sawston is in there. We will be doing a lot more work now with Oakington and Sawston to develop the proposals. Sawston is obviously, again, showing how all this is beginning to integrate now, which has been an issue in the past, I know, but it is all integrating. Sawston, of course, is affected by the South East corridor, which will be going out for consultation tomorrow, the 1307, because Strategy 1 is looking at reopening the old line as a transport corridor that could well be used for CAM. And so that will be incorporated into that study. The intention is to come back with the business cases for Oakington and Sawston early in 2019, and then take the proposals forward if the business cases stack up. So there will be another decision point for the board. We can, we feel, meet the cost of doing this extra work from the existing approval. You'll be pleased to know, I'm sure, of the £150,000. If that does prove to be problematic, it doesn't seem to be at the moment, then we will obviously come back to you. We won't delay the process. We will come back and give you an explanation of what further is required, if anything. But at the moment, we feel we can do the 2 pilots within the 150. That is only bringing it up, of course, to the full business case, if you like. Obviously, then, there is the cost of the construction, but that will come out in the full business case and the benefits that we expect to get out of it. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Lewis, do you want to kick off with any questions?
No, I'm happy. I guess my only point is just that I wouldn't want us there to lose some of the work that's been done on the other hubs, because there's quite a lot of useful recommendations. I'm not saying the GCP should pay for it, but we should certainly keep a follow-up on the other locations that we put considerable work into.
I agree with that. I mean, just like on greenways, the 12 greenways have definitely attracted interest, and we've now effectively got a reserve list for the Greenways Mark II or something like that. I just see these as the first of our pilot rural travel hubs, and we absolutely should do more in future, and then we got the work and the reserve list, so I think that's really good. I do not see this as the end of the journey. This is just the first wave.
I totally agree with that. I think these are the first 3. One wants to see 4, 5, 6 and a few more. I have a question, actually, which may not be able to answer. The City 6 bus, currently, is that subsidised or is it a commercial service? Because bearing in mind a lot of those discussions, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, and it may well be maybe Mike could perhaps let me know what that is, please, because sometimes that actually does influence the business case, okay, as it goes forward as to the subsidies or not, as the case may be. I'm thinking about the next phase business case. So I think it will be useful just for me, certainly, to know whether that is the case or not at the moment. Thank you.
Well, and partly in the wider context, we all eagerly await the results of the Combined Authorities review into bus provision in the county. Claire.
Only question is whether Rachel and Peter have loads of free time and could just incorporate Foxton view of this as well with the Foxton study.
Well, I think it's quite a good point about our terminology, because we seem to have 2 rural travel hubs, a master, which is Sawston and Oakington, a master transport planning exercise at Whittlesford, and a study at Foxton, which could include a travel hub. So to my mind, we're doing 4 of them. And whether we are being too cute in our phraseology, but I'll leave that to Peter probably to think about. But effectively, we're doing 4, which is good, which is a good number, 4. We're getting on with it, and there will, as Lewis says, within it there'll be more behind. But I see them as 4 things that we're now doing in the district, which I'm really pleased about. Can I move us on to the recommendation on page 341, 2.1 to note this, 2.2a to do Whittlesford, 2.2b the cycle parking spaces. Claire, if you had a vote.
It would definitely be in favour. I liken this to the value of a tube station in London. I was very surprised at the Assembly. There was quite a lot of feeling against these things. And my rational argument would be that the downside of extra parking and therefore traffic has the upside of much better public transport provision. So I think reflecting the Assembly conversation, there may well be people who say this is a bad thing, but I think we've got to explore it and see what it would do. Very positive.
Thank you. So if I ask members of the board, are you happy to support this? Thank you.
Yeah, and I just take the point that Claire made, which is that what we need to also link in, Francis, is the spreading of public transport, because what we want to see these hubs do, and I believe they will, is enable stronger public transport to spread further out rather than all start at the edge of Cambridge.
Thank you. So we're happy with that and we approve it. Thank you. So we are on agenda item 12, the date of the next meeting, Wednesday, 21st of March, 4 p.m. in the Christ Visiting Room in Shire Hall. And finally, Chris, we bid you thank you very much indeed for your amazing contribution. Have a wonderful time back up north. I hope you enjoyed the flat lands around here.
Chair, I have got used to it and that little hunt that called the Gogs, but I haven't mentioned, I'm back up to Durham. Everybody tells me I can't have a conversation without mentioning that, but I shall miss it. I have really enjoyed it, and thank you very much for all your support, and I thank everybody that I've worked with on the schemes. I have enjoyed it.
Thank you. And we welcome Peter, and we welcome you for the next meeting as well, and we congratulate Claire on her promotion. Thank you. I close the meeting at 6:13. Thank you.